Good morning, everyone. This is Carrie McCann, the president of the Iowa Council of Foundations, and I have 11:30, so we will go ahead and get things started. The Iowa Council of Foundations is pleased to serve as the state's lead philanthropic entity and provide training and education for community foundations across the state. And we are really excited about this second webinar of our two-part series this summer with Tony Macklin. Today, Tony is going to talk with us about how to work with your board as resource builders. And we also have a guest speaker joining us today that we will hear from. And here is a quick look at their photos so you'll know who you're hearing from. Tony is a philanthropy consultant, and he's done a few things for the Iowa Council of Foundations over the last year. Obviously, the first part of this webinar series, but he has also done a few things the last several months and will be one of our speakers at the Connect conference this year. Tony offers a unique perspective because he's worked at a community foundation and has also had experience in working with community foundations that use the host affiliate model. So really excited to hear what Tony has to share with us today. And we also have the president of the Okoboji Foundation, Mary Freiborg, who will be sharing some information about the work that they are doing in their community foundation. Before we kick things off, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping notes. I have muted all the lines today, so we won't have any background noise. And we still want this to be interactive for you, so you can use the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen to submit any questions that you might have for Tony or Mary or myself. And we will be sure to get those answered throughout the webinar today. And I also wanted to note that this webinar is being recorded, so we will get that posted to the ICOF website, hopefully this afternoon or maybe even early tomorrow morning. And we will be sending an email to all of you who have registered and are participating with some handouts and a direct link to those recordings if you'd like to share them with other members of your group. So those will be all of our housekeeping notes. So I will go ahead and turn things over to Tony to get us started.
Thanks very much, Carrie. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So welcome everybody to this second webinar. A couple notes that we had last time that I'll repeat this time. We're using the term board as a generic term for your affiliate's governing body. You might call it something different, and you may not even have a legal board structure. Often affiliates don't, but at least for this time, this will use board for a simple term. The upside is for those of you who don't have a legal structure of your own, that means you don't have to worry about those kind of things, and your host takes care of them for you. So on the last webinar in July, we covered some topics that helped you build an effective affiliate board. And so what's the big picture of stewarding a community foundation, the core responsibilities of the board, an effective board culture, and then some tips on recruitment and orientation and self-evaluation. The recording and the handouts are on ICOF's website, so if you want to catch up and you missed it, you can go back and listen and download some of the material that related to that. Today's webinar builds on that to talk about how to build a AAA approach to culture of philanthropy. This is a great model that's easy to implement for small organizations. You can even recommend it to your grantees if you like the idea. We'll do some tips for board resource development work. We'll talk about some overall resource development strategy issues, and then Carrie's going to jump in and provide some tips on resource building with the Endow Iowa and County Endowment Program. Some of the slides that you'll see today are courtesy of the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance's Community Foundations Boot Camp. Indiana Philanthropy Alliance is the peer to ICOF, a couple states away, and they do a one-day and two-day boot camp for community foundation staff and board members, and I think ICOF's planning to host that again next year for all of you. So this slide, the Community Foundations, a really big picture, is more for your reference. We're not going to go through it in detail, but it's a great one-page chart on all of the different functions and roles of a community foundation. It ends up being a great thing to add to any kind of board development or education or onboarding materials you might have along the way. And so you'll have a copy of this when you get the slides in the next day or so. It shows that you have donors that are engaged in a lot of different ways through a lot of different kinds of gifts, and we're going to talk today actually about sort of donors' gifts beyond cash, because a lot of times they bring other things to the table when you're thinking about resource development, and then all the rest of it. So just a quick reference again of sort of where we are within the whole organization. So today's topic is really about big picture resource building. And we are talking about how board members can play these AAA roles with different segments of donors, helping make offers to those donors to fulfill wishes, and then thinking about fulfilling those wishes through 4 types of capital. I'll go through each of those parts across the webinar, and other folks will chime in along the way. So what is a AAA board? This is a theory or a practice that was developed by a woman named Kay Sprinkle Grace, and you can see her website on the bottom of this. She's a longtime board member and fundraiser, both as a volunteer and staff member, and she came up with a simple way to think about the 3 roles that board members can take when they're working really well together to do resource development or resource building: ambassador, advocate, and or asker. And we'll go through each of these. The ambassador role is really the function that almost every board member plays in some way, and hopefully every staff member, every other volunteer. It's the way that you are reaching out to cultivate people who might be interested in the foundation's work and in the tools and services you have available to the community. They're often the folks who are really great at donor renewal or stewardship or thanking. So it's folks that may not be comfortable with a direct ask of another person for money or for a gift to a scholarship fund. Often these folks who are stellar at ambassadors are also stellar at writing thank you notes, dropping folks an email, popping by when you see them at lunch and saying thank you so much for your gift. And so it's a great way to sort of roll the ambassador role before and after gifts along the way. Like all board members, the ambassadors are well coached in any messages about impact, and so they've got a couple stories in their belt to say, oh, I know we just made these grants to these organizations and 20 kids got better art supplies or 40 homeless people were housed, whatever the numbers might be, so they can make things tangible beyond a pot of money at the foundation. And they might master some kind of elevator speech, or as many people are turning it now, more of an elevator question, 1 or 2 or 3 sort of thought-provoking questions that help people think about philanthropy. And often that conversation, that short conversation, is sometimes more engaging than I've got this 2-minute pitch I need to send to you or give to you. The second role is the advocate. This is the person who's willing to think strategically about their connections in the community and shares information about the foundation in common group settings, Rotary Club, golf course, business gatherings, other folks who can sort of champion you in more of a group setting, either small group or a large group, and they feel comfortable with that more public role in the process. The advocates may also be your strong ties to government organizations, either local or county or state, to say, hey, the foundation's making this great impact in the county. We're proud of the donations we're getting and the grants that we're making, and you need to know about sort of the tactical things that we're doing along the way. Or maybe other partner organizations with resource, corporate funder or a school system that could supply something to children alongside of your grants. And so they think at those sort of top level, system level kinds of connections. They're usually more well-informed about the reasons for support. So if you have sort of a mini case statement or behind the scenes a strategic plan that says here's the 5 things we're trying to accomplish, they usually have that in their head. They're able to weave those into a group conversation. And then oftentimes they learn a little more about handling questions and objections. So they might say, oh, I know that people are worried about scholarship funds for this reason, or they're not sure why you should have an endowment or not, and they'll know a little more about sort of the tools and tactics along the way. The last role is the asker, and the best people who do this have already made their own gifts to the foundation, whether they've made gifts to other funds that already exist, or they've set up their own funds, or made an estate gift of some kind. These are the folks who are willing to share their enthusiasm for the foundation from a donation strategy. So even if they don't quite make an ask right off the bat, they know they can say, I made this gift and it's why I'm so excited about it. Often you're matching them strategically with prospective or current donors to maximize that conversation. So-and-so knows so-and-so. Most of you probably do this already, but you sort of write it all down during a board meeting to make sure who's got the best, friendliest contact or has the longest history with somebody along the way. They're often teamed with another board member, usually an ambassador or an advocate may have teed up a conversation about the foundation or have done a presentation about the foundation, and oftentimes they're benefiting from the work of the ambassadors or advocates because the ambassadors and advocates are laying the groundwork for people understanding the foundation's value in the community and understanding the sort of the key messages and strategies the foundation has along the way. A couple of slides of key practices for these. And so those 3 roles seem pretty intuitive and they're pretty easy to think about, but here's what folks talk about when you put this into practice. It really builds a year-long culture of philanthropy for the organization. So fundraising isn't just about an annual appeal or we always talk about the December board meeting or whatever the case is. It starts being a conversation that's woven into every board meeting or every board gathering. And it helps the foundation think about other people you can engage in the resource building process. And so anybody can be an ambassador, a kid who got a scholarship, a nonprofit who has their first good technology in years and can actually make a bigger difference, whatever the case may be. And so you can start thinking about that other ambassador and advocate roles in addition to your board members. Allows the board to think about that any interaction they have in the community can be connected to the foundation in some way along the way. And so they can think, oh, I've got my ambassador hat on. I need to say something here, or I'm going to be going to that meeting and I think there's an opportunity to advocate for the foundation's mission and partnerships in the community. And you sort of check the box every week to see what role you're playing along the way. And great AAA boards, if you want to use the term, do a lot of good communication internally and externally throughout a resource building process. And so again, at every board meeting or between them, they're checking in with their key staff member or the board president to say, hey, I made this presentation. Hey, I ran into these people and I think that they're ready to learn more about it. Or hey, I advocated for the organization this way and here's the result of it. That sometimes happens naturally, especially in small towns, but it doesn't get documented well. And so great AAA boards have some way of, at least getting it done on paper or in a database, minimum paper, just so you have some records of where the process is. AAA boards also do a great job of matching each person with their strengths. As I said before, not everybody feels comfortable with an outright ask, although you're hopefully getting most of your board members there, but at least they start feeling comfortable that they can take an ambassador role or an advocate role before they feel comfortable as an asker. One of the community foundations I was talking with back in Indiana when they were doing their boot camp talked about how they took their board members on a journey through these 3 roles in their 3-year board cycles. And so they asked each of the board members in their first year to be a simple ambassador and make sure they feel comfortable getting the language down and connecting with people about the foundation. In the second year of their board term, they asked them to take on more advocate roles. And then by the 3rd year, they asked them to take on more ask roles. Some people jumped ahead fast because of their personalities, but some people felt comfortable with that journey and got more confident along the way. So you might think about that across a multiple year board term. Oftentimes people are using these AAA board responsibilities as part of a board job description. And you'll receive a handout tomorrow or today with the webinar recording that shows an example of that. Sometimes it's encased in an annual board work plan, and so I might have a generic board job description, but then I sign up from an annual board agreement to say, okay, here's 10 things that we need board members to do, and I'm willing to sign up for these 5. I was on a board that did that, and it was really a great check-in process for all of us. And we talked about this at the last webinar too. So we had ambassador roles and advocate roles, and ask roles, and there were 4 or 5 options underneath, and we could each choose which options made sense for us depending on our professional setting or depending on the kinds of time or connections we had in the community. So you can create sort of easy checklists for your board members and volunteers. Great AAA board members or boards also have some regular practices in the messages and stories and priorities. So you might have somebody who comes in each month as a grantee or a scholarship winner just to tell a story about what's going on. So it's an easy story that can be retold. Sometimes you're writing that down. Sometimes there might be a high school kid who takes a video of a grantee in action. Again, the friend in Indiana I was talking to, every summer she grabs a couple of high schoolers who are good with video equipment and takes them along for visits to grantees, and they make the videos because they're faster and better to do it than she is. And then you're practicing those stories. And so when I was on the board, I mentioned before where we were taking all 3 of the AAA roles, I had to go home and practice our messages on my wife and a couple of friends. And when my wife actually got what we were doing, I knew I was successful somehow. And then she allowed me to practice on a couple of her friends, and they gave me some good coaching on where I could have been clearer or not. So it was all great. And you can make it fun. It doesn't have to be really sort of rocket science, but it just helps to get it verbalized in front of some other people who are friendly to you. There's some key tools that are helpful for AAA boards, and hopefully your host community foundation can help you develop these, or maybe already has templates for these that you can use and share. So a basic fact sheet about your foundation that people can quickly hand out or email around, including your strategic priorities, whatever your plan may be. 1 page of key messages and key questions to start conversations. So beyond the fact sheet, is it, gosh, in the past year we've done X amount of things, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary, what kind of difference do you want to make in the community? There's lots of great tools out there. You can steal some philanthropy questions, and again, your host probably has some ideas from their development team. Those are all good things to have on hand. At least 3 stories about impact, and I like when people have different kinds of stories. So there might be one that's about a grantee, one that might be about scholarships or other kinds of individuals making a difference in the community with the foundation, and then at least one about a donor themselves, either taking a leadership role through the community foundation, engaging their family through a donor advised fund, or maybe making a legacy gift that's going to have benefit over generations, and have easy access to those in my head to talk with people about. Oftentimes there's a longer FAQ, question and answer kind of document behind the scenes that helps people with some of the more details about, like, what does the donor advised fund do or not, what can we do with the scholarship fund or not, whatever the cases are, and that helps you just in case you run into more specific questions from somebody. So that's the basics of a AAA board approach. You can look online, and there's other tools and templates available for free. Kay, the author of this idea, has a couple of books that are pretty easy to read if you want to find those on Amazon or wherever else you buy books. And perhaps your hosts even have access to some of these materials. Our guest, Mary Freiborg from the Okoboji Foundation, has some really practical ways that she's helped her board members become ambassadors and advocates and askers. You'll receive a handout that has 14 or 15 tips from her of things that she's been doing, as well as a couple of examples of materials that the board members are using. But let's bring Mary on the line, and she can tell you a little more about some of the ideas that she's implemented and how they've worked. Mary, do we have you?
Thanks, Tony. I think so. Am I on? Excellent. Thank you, Tony. And hello to everybody from Okoboji. It's a beautiful day here, and I wish you were all here so we could have lunch together. That would be the perfect thing. I'm excited to share some of these things with you, and I know that most of you are already probably doing most of these already. And when I put together this list, I wasn't aware of the AAA board concept, but I just love it. And I think probably each one of you was doing the same thing I was doing in saying, yes, I know which one of my board members currently fit into each one of these 3 roles. We have 15 board members for the Okoboji Foundation, and obviously all 15 are ambassadors in one way or another. I would say that probably by this point in time we have about 12 of them who have worked into being an advocate, and I think that although all of them give their own gift in some way, the actual being an asker, I would probably put 5 or 6 of them comfortably into that category. And I did love, Tony, too, how you talked about that they do progress that way. So as they continue on their term, of course they get more comfortable with that. So what I did on my handout that would be available, I went through some key categories that we probably all do with our boards. The first group would be marketing and publicity, and the one thing that we do every other year is a report to the community, which is a nice printed report. But what we've done to really make each one of our board members an ambassador, we do a cover letter from the board of directors that gets mailed out with that board report, and they select 5 or 6 people that they have connections with that they think would really benefit from knowing this information. And it could be just writing a thank you to someone who's a pretty major donor already, or sending it to somebody that they know would be new and might really want to know that we even have a community foundation for the Lakes area. The cool thing about this cover letter is there's a space on it for them to write a personalized note, and then we address the envelope that the big report goes out in handwritten format too. On the back of it, we do have those frequently asked questions about what is a community foundation and why is the foundation the center point of giving. And honestly, that's a good reminder for all of us every once in a while, and the board members, to just check back and look at that. So that's one of the things that's included. So we have that. We have something new that we started this year along with our event, and this is really being an ambassador in a visible way. And we gave each one of the people who sponsored our event a large 3x5 flag with our logo and giveokoboji.com on that flag, so that they could really be proud of being part of our center point of giving and making that lasting positive impact. And that was the newest thing that we did along the way of marketing and visibility. We have a summer insert that we put into our free Lakes News Shopper every summer in July when it's prime time for the most people to be here. And that is part of what's attached and will be available later. So you can see that highlights our board itself with a photo, and it highlights all the grants that we've given and also the other people who have joined us in our family of funds. And then under hosted events, we have a June fundraiser event. And really, they start out being ambassadors, the board members do, by just attending it, but they all sponsor it and have additional seats that they use to invite guests that are kind of on our list of who else should be coming to hear this story. So they really do become advocates in that way. We also have a July annual investors meeting, which is free for anyone who's ever given anything to the foundation. Just want to share a really nice kind of advocate story there. One of our board members, this is where we elect the new board each year. So one of our retiring board members did a great job of saying that someone in the community told him the story of how the foundation was important and got him onto the board. And then this year when his term was expiring, he went to that person's son, who's now a 30-year-old, that next generation we're trying to engage, and talked with Ryan about joining the board. So he said it is a complete circle where Ryan's dad asked him and he's asked Ryan, and Ryan has come back onto the board. So that really fits into part of what we're trying to do with engaging that next generation too. Our strategic planning is another thing where we are really looking at people to become advocates and even askers. And we have 5 make or break priorities that we've just set that will take us through the year of 2021. And those priorities are led by board members, and we call them champions. We have one that's for board succession planning, staff succession, clarity of brand, community engagement, and clear growth goals. And the last one is, of course, our fundraising growth goals. goal. So that one, I'm sure that those people I talked about before that are kind of the 5 or 6 comfortable askers will probably be more comfortable in that role. And at each of our board meetings, those people bring forward what the next steps are to the board itself. So they really have accountability and are real advocates in doing that. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is just our family of funds connections. And I know that Tony is going to talk about not just an asker having to do with gifts that would be acquired, but really asset building, building those trust partnerships so that we all work together in partnership instead of competition. And we have especially a couple of younger board members that might not have financial assets themselves that are fluid at this point, but they have been great connectors in our community with other nonprofits and also with other individuals who don't realize what a donor advised fund could do for them and how Endow Iowa might be able to help them. And we're very fortunate to be able to do that through our affiliation with Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines. And I know I'm just about out of time, so the last thing I wanted to bring forward is our Lakes Nonprofit Summit, and that is where we really are all ambassadors, and we do that each fall. It's free training for any of the nonprofits in the area to come and kind of network. And this year we'll be sharing our staff succession planning and also our board self-assessment that they might want to tweak and use. And then we put together a nonprofit calendar of events for our area so that we're not stepping on each other's toes. We also try to talk about who has an upcoming larger fundraising kind of campaign, and we give a grant update on our own process. And Joe Sorensen usually joins us with a highlight on wealth transfer and Endow Iowa, other things that are great for all of us to hear. And the last thing I want to share that really is something we're trying to do, our board meetings can get overwhelming with all the things we're talking about and trying to have them involved in. So we have a new board chair that will just be starting in September. And the one thing that she's going to ask everyone to do at the end of each meeting is just summarize and say the one thing that you can do before we meet again is, and then just kind of really bullet point that one thing so that even if you feel some of the board members haven't been as involved as possible, that one thing would be what we really want to highlight so everyone gets involved. And for example, at our September meeting, it would be that she asks each one of our board members to actually attend that Lakes Nonprofit Summit as an ambassador in October. That's it.
Those are terrific examples, Mary. Give you one other minute. You and I were talking a couple of days ago, and you mentioned a great multi-generation event that was hosted by one of your younger board members, and it sounds like something that could be easily replicated for other folks in their resource building strategy.
We started our Legacy Society reception 3 years ago, and it has been a wonderful tool. The first year, so our Legacy Society includes anyone who has let us know that we're in their will or estate plans. And it's hosted by one of our board members, and it happens in August when things have calmed down here a little bit. And it's just at their home on a Thursday evening, and it's appetizers and drinks. And the board member hosting it actually kind of does their own testimonial about why they are in our Legacy Society and why it's important to them. So last year, the individual that hosted it had just created their own donor advised fund as a family fund, and they have adult children that have just moved back to the area, so that was a perfect story. This year, we have a younger board member who will be hosting it at his home, and he wanted us to make sure that we bring one of our youth and philanthropy students to talk about why youth and philanthropy is having such an impact here. But the really cool thing will be that we'll have our donors, many of them that are in their 70s or 80s. We'll have our board member that's more in the 30 or 40-year-old range. And then our youth and philanthropy speaker is one of the young ladies whose parents are just kind of new to the area, but her father is also the economic development corridor CEO. So it's going to be just a nice tie of how nonprofit and business and 3 generations really can work together to make the community a fantastic place.
I think that's a great strategy. Sometimes we tend to only do Legacy Society events for folks who are 50 plus or 60 plus, or sometimes it's only about youth philanthropy. And I think people will get inspired by each generation being involved. And that sounds like a easy and informal way to do it.
Everybody does love those kids, and they should. And when you have left that kind of a gift, you can specifically look at this young lady and say, exactly, that's why I want to make that lasting positive impact.
Puts the face on the legacy. Thanks. We're going to move back on with some more content. I'll bring you back on at the end, Mary, to see if there's any other tips or ideas you had based on what you've been hearing.
Thank you.
Okay. So that was a great segue into sort of how do you think about different segments of donors. So we've got different board members playing different roles. Hopefully you're already doing some basic segmentation of your prospects, thinking about them. We won't go into a ton of detail on this, but the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance's boot camp talks about these different audiences as typical ways that community foundations break up their segments. The core of it is that the current and former board members, they're always your best gift prospects, and especially the best people, as Mary said, to leave legacy gifts and think about estate planning or insurance gifts or some of the other things. Other folks that are typical audiences for planned gifts, the classic wealthy childless widows are the folks who are most likely to do planned gifts or to use their insurance policies or other things for charitable giving. The other audience that we often miss as community foundations, or what some people would term blue-collar wealth. It's the wealth that's captured in family businesses and family land, family farms, other kinds of things. And they may not be visibly wealthy, but they have these assets that could be turned into charitable giving. And it may be right up your alley that you've been thinking about these folks, but sometimes community foundations miss them. Philanthropic families, the conversations about how do you want to sustain your family's giving legacy, how do you want to keep your kids and grandkids connected, and can a donor advised fund help? Everyday citizens obviously bring in annual gifts, and you can go down this, we won't go through every one, but they sort of quick tips on which kinds of gifts and sponsorships work for each audience. At minimum, when you are board members are thinking about their asks and their advocacy, they're sort of looking across these different audiences to see where they can make the best connections for you. And of course, always working with professional advisors and thinking about it from a two-way street. And I think sometimes we get in the habit of wanting to keep sending stuff to professional advisors and not thinking about what we can do for them as community foundations. They're the sources of referrals oftentimes. They're also the front line for talking about philanthropy with their clients, and even if they don't do a ton of work with wealthier clients, just keeping the philanthropy conversation going in the community can be really valuable. A community foundation I talked to in another state, mid-sized community foundation, but the executive director said her way of engaging professional advisors was just this sort of simple method. She wrote notes to 3 or 4 professional advisors, different advisors each month. And she sent them an article that she ran across. She thanked them for being involved in something that she saw in the community, where maybe they were the chair of the hospital board or Boys and Girls Club board or whatever. She sent them a note about something that was upcoming in the Community Foundation's education series. And something that I hadn't thought about before until she said it, she also was engaging them in understanding what happened after a fund or an estate was set up. And so they brought a donor advised fund client to the Community Foundation, the foundation making grants along with that client, and she could drop a note back to the advisor to say, hey, by the way, your client, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, whoever it is, just made these 4 grants, and they had this impact all of these kids' lives. And it helped help the estate planning attorney in that case really understand the legacy that they were helping clients leave, much like Mary said about the event that she was doing. And so you might think about how do you loop your planned giving folks and your estate planning attorneys and your other advisors back in on the impact of what their clients and shared clients are doing with you, and continuing to be thinking about stewarding them in your AAA roles as much as you are stewarding donors. One highlight, and this is a metric that gets updated each year, but it's something good for you to remember as Community Foundation folks, and definitely good for your grantees to remember, and that's that nonprofits and even community foundations don't spend enough time on retention and expansion of existing donors. There's really huge turnover of donors, especially in an annual giving setting for nonprofits, but even huge turnover for community foundations if the donors are either giving on an annual basis to some kind of operating fund, or they've made gifts that are planned gifts that are revocable because folks aren't spending enough time on that stewardship and engagement and listening and thanking process with the donors. And so your resource building strategy, your advocacy, your ambassadoring, and your asking also has to include what happens after folks have given and keeping them in the loop of the foundation's life. And you should make sure you've got as much stewardship activity and thanking activity built in as you do the asking activity to really improve your retention rates along the way. The other thing to talk about when you're at a community foundation is some of your asking for resources is asking like other nonprofits do. You know, you need to have money for an operating fund or a special project in the community or something that's more current in terms of community needs. But quite often, asset building or resource building in community foundations is more of an offer conversation than an ask, because you're dealing with donors in ways that maybe the average nonprofit doesn't. You're talking about gifts of life insurance policies, you're talking about gifts of real estate, or you're talking about gifts that maybe other nonprofits don't work with on a regular basis, stocks and bonds and things. And so it's an offer for donors to think about all the resources that they have, think about what's touched their lives from a charitable giving standpoint, offering to have them tell stories about what impacted their lives and benefited them along the way, and offering them to pay that forward in some way, whatever makes sense for them, whether it's through a fund or a gift or some combination. Many community foundations are really good at asking donors to tell those stories in group settings or capturing them in a video recording. So Grandma talks about what it was for her to grow up and why she's making this legacy gift so that her grandchildren can see that story later on. Your host hopefully has some tools or techniques that will help you out with this resource building and sort of going from a ask strategy to those kinds of offer conversations and offer questions along the way. And hopefully that's all part of your stewardship piece as well, to help people think about what is it that you're doing in the community and why is it you're doing it that way, and what values are you bringing to the table. And it's an offer to talk about those things, which doesn't have anything to do with a transaction of a fund or a gift of some kind. And it's a great way to get people thinking about philanthropy. When you look at donor psychology studies, when people are thinking about generosity, either they've been primed through questions about what generosity made a impact in your life, Boys and Girls Clubs, scholarships, whatever it may be, and what generosity is meaningful to you, they are more likely to make a gift after that conversation. And so it helps you, that offer conversation sets you up for the ask later on anyway. There are a couple of different studies I just wanted to highlight, and you can read them. You can download them on your own pace if you'd like. One is this study called the Snapshot of Today's Fundraising Landscape that came out a couple of years ago. And they did a massive poll of donors, and here's the top 5 reasons people gave. They gave because of an impact of the gift. It wasn't about the tax deduction. It was about, I can help these kids, or whatever the case may be. It's obviously primed by their personal ability to get where they are in their income and earnings from a yearly basis. The third was their religious and moral obligation. However they expressed that, whether they were connected to a church or just connected in general to a faith tradition. Fourth, you have to be asked most of the time to actually make the gift. And then that fifth one was they owe back to the community because the community helped them create a successful business or helped their kids be successful, or they feel like they owe back to a nonprofit. somebody helped me with obesity and I want to repay that to the next people, or cancer, or whatever the case may be. And so you keep all of these in mind when you're having that conversation with donors about resources and helping them think about the legacy that they want to leave. Sometimes we get in the habit of thinking, oh, I give this way, so everybody else gives this way, and there's really lots of different motivations for giving. The other great study that came out last year is something called Money for Good, and there's a link at the bottom of the screen, and you'll get this in the slides. Money for Good has been a 5 or 6 year set of studies about motivations of donors. This graphic shows you there are 5 different kinds of donors that they've tracked. There are people who are contented benefactors. They've sort of grown up in a giving family, and it's really part of who they are and their identity. Hopefully you find a lot of those folks in your town. There's people who are busy idealists. They want to be generous, but they're too busy or they're not sure where to connect. There's people who are cautious strivers. They want to pay it forward, but maybe they don't feel like they have enough money yet. Usually that's folks that are in their 20s and 30s, maybe even early 40s, where they're still earning money, still building a career, got kids to pay for, all those kinds of things. There are a few people that are unaware, just they're giving sort of not on their radar for whatever reason. They weren't raised in a family that gave back a lot. And then there are a few people who are unengaged critics. They're just not sure that nonprofits are doing a great job, or they're not sure that charitable giving is doing a great job in their community. You can read more in the Money for Good study, but those 3 middle categories, the busy idealists, the cautious strivers, the unaware potentials, are the folks who are most likely that you can prime for additional giving. You can talk to them about where giving fits into their lives, whether it's now or later on. The great thing about the Money for Good study is 2 things. One is when you download the information, they have some messages that you can try out for each of those different audiences. So if you think you see somebody fitting one of those categories, you can figure out which messages work. The other thing they have is a spreadsheet that you can use to figure out which of your donors fit which of the categories. You can either do a survey or do your own quick analysis to see how many people out of each in each category, and then determine do you want to maybe send them some different materials or tell them different stories based on where they are. This may sound advanced, and it can be, but your host can help with this, and at minimum at least you're reminded that people have different ways that they're looking at giving, and you can retest your stories or rethink about different kinds of stories for each of those different audiences. I encourage you to read the Money for Good. There's a short executive summary and then the longer reports that are pretty easy to get through. The last piece about it, in this bigger picture resource development then, is TRU gives 4 types of capital. Estate planning attorneys, wealth advisors, other folks who work with families who are generous, talk about 4 types of capital, and I think it's a useful framework for community foundations and even for basic rural and small town resource building. And these are the 4 types of capital. The financial one's the one we think about all the time, right? Cash and complex assets and planned gifts and the rest. But your donors can bring these other types of capital to the table. So do they want to, along with their cash or instead of their cash, be volunteers and provide their time and talent and expertise? Do they want to provide their knowledge? Maybe it's a corporation that has know-how about technology and they'd like to donate that know-how to 3 or 4 nonprofits in addition to cash along the way. Or maybe you provide them know-how or knowledge on philanthropic solutions. Here's the best ways to help kids move from grade to grade to grade efficiently. And then, of course, they bring their social capital, their social assets, their breadth of their network, the depth of the trust, or the, as people call it, the two-way street, the reciprocity of the trust that they have. I think this 4 capitals or 4 asset models is useful in 2 strategies. One is back to your board members. Which are their strengths? Do they bring not only financial capital, hopefully, but are they really good at bringing the talent, the volunteers? Are they really good at bringing the social networks? Are they really good at bringing the knowledge of the community? And so you can sort of categorize what they bring to the table, and then you can start thinking about what you want from those donors that you're talking to or prospective donors. Is it just cash, or is it a larger offer of that person bringing their whole self to the table. It's a resource. They're a resource of not just cash, but of time, talent, and all the rest of it. You may not deploy volunteers all that often, but if you know where that person is and what kinds of capital they want to provide or gifts that they want to provide to the community, it makes for a deeper philanthropic conversation, and it makes you a better partner to the donor beyond, hey, we just made this gift or we just set this fund of some kind. And lastly, if you do have families that are wanting to give together, or you've got somebody that's setting up funds that they want to get their kids or cousins engaged with, this For Capitals model makes a great sort of mini mission planning or mini philanthropic conversation with the family. What can we bring as individual family members, and how does that add up as all of the families? So you can try this out and see if it works for you. You may not call them those same names, but you at least keep in your head the different kinds of resources that people bring, the different capitals and assets. So that's the basics of big picture resource building, some tips from both myself and from Mary. We're going to bring Carrie back on. She's going to talk a little bit about the Endow Iowa and the other programs that she's familiar with and give you some tips on those. And then we'll see if Mary has any other reactions about how she's been applying some of these ideas. So Carrie?
Great, thanks, Tony. So I just wanted to take a few minutes during the webinar today just to talk about some of the unique asks we can make because we are working at community foundations in Iowa and have the benefit of the Endow Iowa Tax Credit Program. So this slide here is just detailing a few gifts that I think are especially attractive for donors as we think about Endow Iowa. And most of the examples I'm sharing are models that we used when I was working at the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque and some strategies that we used there. So that's the experience that I'm drawing on. The IRA charitable rollover policy that was just approved for really in perpetuity. So the IRA charitable rollover allows donors who are 70 and a half and over to take their IRA distribution and direct those funds to a charitable organization. If they do that for a charitable organization's endowment fund, that can be coupled with Endow Iowa. So that has been a really attractive offer, or as Tony said, an offer, not an ask for the donors. So please make sure that you're aware of that. If you need more information, just let me know. We've talked about a variety of different types of gifts today. Complex gifts, of course, are a unique thing that community foundations have the capacity to help process. So just make sure that your donors are aware of all of those giving options. One that a lot of the community foundations across the state have been using recently is the gifts of grain. So farmers can really donate their grain directly, and then that is figured on the price of the grain that day. So you would process that much like other complex gifts. So again, another tool in the toolkit that you just want to make sure your donors are aware of all of these options. Mary shared some great ideas on Legacy Society and engaging multi-generations in that group, so I won't spend too much time there. Another thing that we've been talking about with many of our host community foundations is corporate gifts and helping corporate foundations maybe transition under the umbrella of community foundations. So we are actually working on some new communications pieces, and this will be one that we hope to have available so you can start using it at the affiliate community foundation level as well. So look for more to come on that. And then Tony spoke a little bit about family gifts and really bringing family funds into the community foundation umbrella and helping those families have conversations. All of those things coupled with Endow Iowa really make community foundations a unique spot for donors to engage in our state. I also wanted to share a couple strategies that, again, I think Endow Iowa allows us to utilize. Tony talked a lot about professional advisors, so I won't spend too much time there, but I think it's important that we talk with professional advisors about community foundations, but also make sure that they understand sort of the administrative rules and regulations around Endow Iowa. I know I've gotten a few calls this year from professional advisors who weren't clear on all of those things, which I'm happy to help with. But if we're communicating that up front with our professional advisors, that means the correct information is being passed along to our donors. So we'll have some resources that will be helpful in that, so I'll share in just a minute. Endow Iowa is also a great way to encourage stretch gifts. If donors know that they're getting that 25% kickback and the state tax credit, you may ask them for a larger gift or may secure a larger gift as a result of that. I know that that's something that happened a lot for us in Dubuque. Endow Iowa is also a great way to encourage agency endowments to either start as an ACORN fund or maybe in working with the donor. But a strategy that your boards can work on is helping those agencies grow their endowments, and there's some trainings available through the Iowa Council of Foundations to help agencies and your board specifically think about that endowment building. So please let us know if we can be helpful in providing that training to you. Another strategy that I used when I was working with nonprofits that held agency endowments with us in Dubuque was talking with them if they were working on a capital campaign about starting an operating endowment with any funds that were left over after that capital campaign. So might be a helpful strategy that you can use with your local nonprofits as well. Memorial funds are another opportunity that donors might be able to connect with. One strategy we've used is reaching out directly to funeral homes so they know that there are opportunities for memorial endowment funds at your community foundation. Sharing that information with them can help them connect in with the community foundation at the appropriate time. So also have some materials we'd be willing to share on that. A few community foundations have started to host match or giving days, and this has been a really successful strategy to secure additional agency endowment funds, but also to engage new diverse donors. And this is one that board members can really get excited about because it gives them a specific time period throughout the year to be focusing in on talking with potential donors about the community foundation and community causes. And it really creates a lot of energy and excitement on a specific day or a specific point in time. So I'd be happy to connect you with partners that have used the Giving Day model. And really it doesn't have to cost too much once you have a giving platform established. Really it's just marketing dollars and encouraging your nonprofit participants to direct some dollars to their own marketing as well. And then finally, one that I think is unique to those of you who receive county endowment funds is the ability to offer endowment challenge grants. Again, that's a way to encourage your nonprofits to establish those agency endowments, which diversifies their revenue stream, but also gives their donors new options to support that nonprofit as well. We have a lot of donors in our state who really now prefer to do their giving to endowments as a result of the Endow Iowa legislation. So encouraging nonprofits to have that as a tool in their tool belt, I think, is a good strategy. I did want to share that we are refreshing the Endow Iowa Toolkit this year and hope to have it available by the Connect conference, which is October 5th. And here's the detail of the items that will be included in this. I will ask if there are any specific communication tools that you think would be helpful to be included in this toolkit. Please feel free to send me a note via email or give me a call. I'd be happy to think through new strategies as we're refreshing this toolkit. It's going to have a nice fresh look, and the content is going to be a little less text heavy and hopefully more reader friendly for our audiences. So those were the things that I had to share. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Mary and Tony, and we can open it up for any questions. If you want to submit the questions through the chat box, that would be great.
Hey, this is Tony. So thanks for that. Those were all great tips. Mary, we've got you back on the line. Anything you pop into your head as you heard the rest of the presentation about what you've been doing?
I just had two things I wanted to share, and one of them is big time based on Endow Iowa. We did a 25th anniversary endowment campaign and specifically created funds that were Endow Iowa funds for our operations, and then 3 field of interest funds for lake quality and environment, arts and culture, and outdoor experience and recreation. And the 2 fund drive co-chairs were from 2 of our largest competitive banks, and both of those people and their organizations committed their funds to our operations endowment because they understood how important it is to have that kind of support for an ongoing professional capability of the community foundation. So it was a pretty amazing process, but that Endow Iowa tax credit is such a motivator for everyone once they realize how much it can benefit them. And then the other thing was just on remembering to say thank you. So we used to send out a Thanksgiving card and then note how much was left in the Endow Iowa Fund for that year, but now by Thanksgiving there hasn't been anything left. So we have changed that, and we now go to a Valentine that we send out that says, thanks for showing your love of the Lakes community as a partner of our foundation. And in that we also announce our summer dinner event sponsorship levels, and those sponsors, we do tie that. They can give to one of our Endow Iowa funds and be a sponsor. We take off the tangible gift that they would receive, but that Endow Iowa works great for that too.
I think the Valentine is a terrific approach. Lots of other nonprofits have used Thanksgiving cards rather than Christmas cards as a way to get ahead of things, but I think the Valentine piece is a nice touch of showing your love for donors and their love for the community. We had a question come in: how do you prioritize the development work when you have an all-volunteer board and no staff? I'll take a quick crack, and then maybe Mary wants to say something. In the small organizations that I've known, you can go back to that AAA approach, ambassador, advocate, asker. As I mentioned, you can download a couple different versions of like annual board job descriptions or board work plans that have 3 things under each of those categories, or 4 activities in each of those categories. Volunteer boards sometimes just need to have something they can write down and say, okay, I know I need to do these 3 things this year. And so having that kind of checklist on an annual basis to know what you're signing up for as an all-volunteer board. And the board president, we talked about this at the last webinar, becomes sort of the chief project manager or chief relationship manager to pull all that together. And so in December, everybody signs up for the next year. Here's the 3 things I want to do, very concrete suggestions. I'm going to make these 3 calls. I'm going to make this kind of presentation as an advocate. Sometime halfway through the year, then one of the board meetings is about a check-in process to say, okay, you all committed to these things. How are we doing on theirs? What do we need to readjust? What have we learned new about somebody's activity in the community or a donor's interest or a new event to do? So just those very practical sign-up sheets really help people make it concrete, and it's easy to take some of the templates that are out there online or the one that you'll receive and make it your own. Mary, you have any suggestions for an all-volunteer board?
I just want to say thank you to all of you that are on all volunteer boards. It's huge what you're doing, and I do really think too that probably, as we did with our strategic planning this year, is just say what are the 5 make or break things, because you have lists that go on and on and on, but really what's going to get us to the next step, and then finding kind of that champion for each one of those, and it could even be 3. Just make it as simple as possible, but as focused on the success that you're trying to reach in your own area, I think, is the best way to go.
Folks who are great resource builders, either as staff or volunteers, will always say it's better to do a few small things well repeatedly than trying to do a bunch of big things off and on. So re-gear your fundraising planning to just the basics of, we know we're going to do these 3 things every quarter, this 1 thing every month, so that you keep building momentum over time rather than sort of being fits and starts. You got to be persistent in people's brains given all the other messages out there in the marketplace. And so persistent postcards or messages or advocacy kinds of strategies are usually the best bet. think we are running up to the end of the hour. We're going to hand this back to Carrie. She's got a couple of last things in terms of upcoming ICOF events. I will see most of you, if not all of you, at the next ICOF Connect session, and you'll have our contact information in a minute if you have any other questions for Mary or me.
Great. Thanks so much, Tony and Mary. We really appreciate your time and your tips and expertise. I did just want to take a few minutes to talk about our upcoming educational opportunities. The donor control webinar we are co-hosting with the Council of Foundations is actually next week, August 18th from 1 to 2 p.m. The registration information is available on the website, and we would love to have you engaged in that. If you have any case studies or questions related to donor control that you'd like to submit to have the Council on Foundation staff weigh in on, you can send that directly to me or Michelle, and we'll be sure to get that included. Probably the sooner the better on those things. We need to get those over to them this week. As we've mentioned, the Connect Conference is October 5th. We will be releasing the agenda shortly, but the registration link is available on the Community Foundation's website and also on the ICOF website. So please go ahead and get registered if you plan to attend. Also, Tony mentioned that we will be bringing the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance's Community Foundations Boot Camp back to Iowa this spring. We are still firming up some dates, but we will host that twice this year, once on the east side of the state and once on the west side of the state. So hopefully you and your fellow board members and staff members will be able to join us for that. It's a really great training opportunity. And then two final updates. I just got a report today. There are 1.4 million Endow Iowa tax credits remaining, so be sure that you're aware of that and maybe sending some updates to your donors. And then finally, a reminder to those of you who received County Endowment Fund dollars, your reports for this past year are due to the Iowa Council of Foundations on August 29th. So please get those submitted. And this last slide here has contact information if you'd like to follow up with any of us about questions or additional resources. We will get the webinar posted to the website and send a link along with the attachments directly to those of you who registered to participate. Thanks so much for spending some time with us, and thanks again to Tony and Mary. Everyone have a great day.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Please stand by.